Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 4 about the legislative branch, and it's Lesson 2 about how the two houses of the United States Congress are different. In this lesson, you'll learn about how the House and the Senate behave differently, and about the impact of the 17th Amendment. In the previous lesson, we learned about 3 ways that we can compare the two houses. The first of those ways was the composition of the houses. And we summed up those differences with this way. The Senate is composed of 2 members each, totaling up 100 members in all, while the House is based on population, and it has a cap at 435 members. In other words, it's over 4 times the size of the Senate. These differences are important for how these two chambers of the United States Congress behave differently. Because the House being such larger is going to require more formal, strict rules to do its business, while the Senate, being smaller, can be more open and deliberative in what it's doing. In other words, they can take more time to talk things out amongst each other. The second way in the previous lesson that we compared the two houses was to look at how the members of each are selected. We summarized the differences by pointing out that the Senate is chosen by state legislatures, or at least it was originally, and that it serves for 6-year terms. The House, in contrast, is directly elected by the people and serves for only 2 years. So as a consequence of this, the House serving for such short terms and having to be directly elected by the people, the House is going to be very concerned about whatever the people are worried about in a moment. If they're particularly upset or angry about something, the House is going to have to be upset and angry about it too in order to get reelected. The Senate, in contrast, is insulated in some ways from that popular opinion. They don't have to directly be reelected by the people. Instead, fellow politicians choose them from the state legislature. And they only come up for election every 6 years. So whatever the people are upset right now about, they may well have forgotten by the time the senators come up for election. So they aren't nearly as much able to be swayed by the passions of the people. The third way we compared the two houses in the previous lesson was to look at the qualifications of the people that serve there. There we noted that to serve in the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old and have been a citizen of the United States for 9 years. While in the House, you need only be 25 and a citizen for only 7 years. The reason this is important is because it was assumed that the House would therefore be younger and more likely to make mistakes because of their inexperience. The Senate was thought more likely to be older, to have greater experience, and have compiled more wisdom during their days, allowing them to be more careful and perhaps more sure in the decisions they make. This difference was summarized very eloquently by George Washington. When the Constitution was written, George Washington served as the chairman of the Constitutional Convention. Thomas Jefferson, one of his fellow founding fathers, was not at the convention, though. Thomas Jefferson was in France at the time that the Constitution was being written. When he returned to America, he went out to dinner with George Washington. And they brought a copy of the Constitution with them and read through it so that Thomas Jefferson could ask Washington questions about this document, why they did this, why they did that. When they got to the part that said that there be a Senate, Jefferson questioned why there should even be a Senate. He pointed out that a House representing the people was what really fulfilled the ideas of John Locke, that a government should represent the true sovereign, the people. But then George Washington told him, the Senate is the saucer in which the tea of legislation is cooled. Now, to understand what Washington meant by this, you have to understand how they drank tea over 200 years ago. Remember back then, if you ordered tea at some inn, the water was being boiled over an open fire in a fireplace off to one side. The tea would be brought to your table, literally boiling hot. And so when they carried the tea to you on a saucer, the saucer was designed for a different purpose than a saucer is under a teacup today. A saucer or a teacup today is there to just catch in case the teacup spills a little bit so it won't fall on your clothes or on the tablecloth. But back then, when the boiling hot tea was brought to the table, the person who was going to drink the tea would then pour the tea out into the saucer. The saucer has greater surface area. The tea would cool quicker. And they could actually drink the tea straight out of the saucer if they wanted, or pour it back in the cup. So the saucer was where the tea cooled down. The tea was brought boiling hot in the cup, and then they used the saucer to cool it down. So what George Washington was trying to say was that legislation may be boiling hot. It may begin in the House of Representatives, which has to react to the passions and anger of the people very quickly or risk not getting reelected. But when that hot tea of legislation is transferred to the Senate, it's cooled down. The Senate takes its time with it. The Senate is more deliberative, more careful. And they can be, because they don't have to be reelected every 2 years. They're older and hopefully wiser in what they're doing. And because there's fewer of them, they can take time to talk things through rather than having to be strict about what they do. In this way, the Senate could be more careful than the House and hopefully stop the House from doing anything really stupid. Now, we have these two houses that have very different characteristics. One is much more passionate and represented the people, while the other one is much more calm, cooled down, and represents the needs of the states because of the Great Compromise. You recall that's where they worked out this controversy between the states at the time of the Constitutional Convention, where states with large population wanted the Congress to be based on population so they'd have more people there, while the states with small populations wanted each state represented the same. That's how we ended up with these two houses. But once we ended up with the Senate, it was decided the Senate would be chosen by state legislatures. So each state is represented equally, and the senators are chosen by the state governments themselves. So in a very real sense, while the House of Representatives represented the people as people of the United States of America, the Senate was representing the states as states. One was representing individual voters. The other was representing these political units of the country. But that changed dramatically in 1913 because a great fear had developed that powerful interests in society, particularly big corporations, were essentially buying state legislatures, paying for candidates there to get reelected, and in exchange getting their votes to pick senators for the United States Senate that these companies liked, who then could serve the company's needs in the Senate, particularly blocking legislation that the companies might think is harmful. If they had a majority of the senators there who were chosen by legislators who liked these companies, then that would be a way, no matter what sort of passionate thing the House got upset about, they could never pass a law that would harm these companies' interests. Well, as fear of this kind of corruption grew, eventually there was enough weight behind the movement to do something about it that the 17th Amendment was added to the Constitution in 1913 that provided for the direct election of United States senators. No longer would they be chosen by their state governments. Instead, the people of each state would elect them. So now, the Senate represents people as people also, just like the House of Representatives does. No longer are senators representing the interests of state governments. They are representing the interests of people, citizens of the United States that happen to live within that state. So even as the people gained more representation in Congress by this change, the states lost their last great protection in the Constitution, which you could see the effects of from the unit that we had previously in the course about American federalism, where no longer was the Senate standing there to stop the national government from doing things that infringed upon the powers and rights of the states. Instead, the Senate would oftentimes go along with these things because they are representing the passionate views of the people in that moment that might want something done that could even harm their state governments. So now let's review what we learned in this lesson. Why does it matter that the Senate is smaller than the House of Representatives? Is it because it has stricter rules, or that it can have freer debate, or that it cares more about what the public thinks, or that it's less mature? The correct answer is that it can have freer debate. With fewer people, it doesn't need as strict rules, and each person can have more time to talk. Why does it matter that the House has shorter terms? Is it because they are more influenced by the public then? Or is it they can be more deliberate? Or is it they're more experienced? Or that they have more relaxed rules? Their shorter terms of office, 2 years, compared to 6 for the Senate, mean that they'll be more influenced by the public. They'll be more worried about what the public thinks in any given moment so they can get their votes and get reelected in a shorter period of time. Why does it matter that senators are older? Is it because there'll be more turnover as they die, they'll get replaced? Or is it an assumption that they'll make wiser decisions? Or is it they're more open to changing things? Or that they'd be less political? The correct answer, though, is assumed that with them being older, they'd be more wise in their decisions. And finally, how did the 17th Amendment change America? Did it make the Senate smaller? Did it make the House bigger? Did the states lose power because of this amendment? Or did the national government lose power? The states lost power. They could no longer rely on picking senators to protect their interests, since the senators were voted on by the people rather than chosen by the state governments. So that's it for Lesson 2 from Unit 4. Lesson 3, which we'll have next from Unit 4, will be about the different powers of the two houses of the United States Congress.